Hello and welcome to the Selfish Podcast. Today we have Bobby Hedglin-Taylor, and he sounds like a man of multiple talents. Very interesting from what I've read of him so far, and I'm very excited to hear more about him personally and how he got into the things he got into. So, hi, Bobby. Can you just share with the guests and the audience where in the world are you, and what time of day is it for you?
It is the morning, and it is a sunny day in New York City in the United States.
Oh, nice. It's not a sunny day here in Spain.
Mhm.
It's just the rain's just broke. But it's been heavy, heavy rain. It's just started. Yeah, and we actually met via a Facebook group where people connect for podcasts and stuff.
Yes.
Have you done many podcasts before, or whereabouts are you in your podcasting journey?
Um, when I started my journey as an author, I basically came to it through many different sources, but I had done a weekend of workshops. It was more of a week. It was about 12 days altogether, but there was a weekend of intense workshops for first time authors. And one of the breakout sessions, the speaker said to get better access to a different audience, as well as share your brand, as well as connect with people, and you get a better interviewing style, to schedule and try to get on 100 podcasts in 1 year. So um, I went through that that writing process, but then I started to promote my books even before they were published. And it was really fascinating that it was actually building my brand. It was also making me a better interviewee, so that I had a chance to share, things clearly as to what I was doing and what my path was. And so you are number, I believe, 89 in the 100 podcasts, because
Nice.
I have I reached 1 year on February 12th, so I didn't quite make 100, but it came very close. But the idea behind it is, and if there are first time authors out there, I suggest it highly because I've learned so much about my brand. I've learned about my books. I've learned about other people, and I learned about interviewing styles as well. So I'm happy to share that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, my second to last guest, she is also an author, and she's on her 89th podcast as well, was my episode. It was also 89, so that's
Oh,
nice to
wow.
correlation. And yeah, and she was just saying she was doing the same, trying to reach 100, and I had someone else telling me they're trying to reach 100. So I wonder if
Mhm.
that is a trending thing that people are sharing now to try and just do that in a year, do 100 in a year, which is a lot. But like you said, the process and the growth you get from it is like just so many different things. They said it helps you build your own way of directing yourself in how you speak, what you share. But also for me, it's all about the affirmation in your intentions and what you're actually doing. Because every time you refining that process of what you're actually doing. And I found just my doing YouTube, doing podcasts, it's just benefited me in so many ways, even if no one ever listened.
Mhm. Well, the other thing too is that it broadens both of our audience. Even if there's 30 people that are listening right now, and then over the course of a year, 150 to 1,000 people listen to this episode, it still adds to both of our reach. I share everything on every platform, whenever it's released, and then I put it on my link tree. And I have people that are just, they're podcast junkies, and they just like something to listen to while they're in the car, and so I hope that my message and my voice and my stories are enlightening. So.
Oh, nice. And I'd really like to get to know you more personally and deep. And I'd love to start with people's childhood and where they grew up and what life was like. So would you be able to paint me a picture of what your life was like, where you grew up, what your parents did, like pre 10 years old?
Sure. Well, I was born in Pennsylvania, which is about an hour and a half outside of New York. And I was born on a small family farm. And my parents both were, my father was a welder and a very gifted musician. And my mother was a cobbler when I was very, very young. And then the rest of my life, she worked in restaurants and was a factory worker. So I come from very limited means, uh, poor family from the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. But my great grandfather and grandfather bought plots of land in Pennsylvania on the top of a mountain, and they both put houses there. But then my great grandfather sold a plot of land to each one of his 13 children and surrounded himself with his family. And so it became this little bubble of crazy Italian people living on the top of a mountain. And I know the last name Hedglin doesn't really scream Italian. My father's father was half English, so that's where Hedglin comes from. It's an English name. But I was raised by a Sicilian family, Sicilian grandmother, and yes, I have red hair and green eyes. So there are redheaded Italians out there. And so I grew up in this little bubble of dysfunctionality and crazy people who I love dearly because they shaped and molded me into who I am, regardless of how they were situated in my life. I went to elementary school, high school, and college, all in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and then got the bug to come to New York to become an actor in the '80s. And I had been I'd been working in the city as a ballroom dancer and in nightclubs and in restaurants. Back then, there was a great call to have ballroom dancers come in, perform, and then get people up to dance. So that was kind of like my first sort of full-time job in the entertainment industry. And then slowly after that, I got a full scholarship to the American Musical and Dramatic Academy in New York City. So I permanently moved here and made this my home ever since. So I've been here since the '80s, and I've had that crazy rags to riches, but there's no riches. I've just rags to rags kind of upbringing. Oops, sorry, my phone alarm just decided to go off during there. I
No
apologize.
problem.
Um,
Yeah, so
but
it's
yeah,
really interesting transformation from like that sort of home life, like you said, living in the mountains where you're
yes,
surrounded by your own family bloodline. It sounds like it's a little community within itself, and 13 children is a lot for him to have that many children, and then each of
absolutely.
them must have had some children, so there must have been quite a large group of you living there. Um,
Yes, and it was the extended families that started to settle in either in the land that was sold to them. So this is the other thing. My great grandfather, because of the legalities in Pennsylvania, he wasn't able to sell the land. He wasn't able to give the land away, so he
hmm,
sold the land for $1 to each child.
yeah,
So
oh,
that's
nice.
that's how it happened. And I still have one of the deeds, and I looked at it. I was like, $1? What is this? 1884? You know. So, but yeah. So that was how he brought his children from between Sicily and Jersey City was basically where everybody was settled anyway, and everybody either moved up and then dissipated, or the core that stayed there were there until I left the mountain in the '80s, and then now it's sort of dissipated. There are still a few people up there on that part of the hill, but it's not the same as it was when I was growing up. It's sort of, it's sort of liquidated into people selling their property, other people moving in and buying and raising and putting up houses and things like that. So it's no longer Ravioli Mountain, as I call it, and that was
Nice.
the derogatory term that became the title of my cookbook, Escape to Ravioli Mountain: A Memoir and Food, which I'm publishing very soon. I was just editing it all day yesterday, and I hate editing. Oh my God, I hate it. But it
Nice.
would be my second book. My first book is about my mom. My mom passed from COVID in 2020, and so I she had dementia, and she also had a very interesting way to coin a phrase. And so for the past 6 or 7 years before she died, I would be documenting those statements, and I would write them down, and then it became a book of quotes from my mom. So my first published book was "Shit My Mama Says," a humorous look at life while dealing with dementia. And it's great for caregivers. It's also great for anybody who needs a good laugh, especially in this world that we're living in right now with war and global pandemics and horrible people trying to take over governments.
Yeah, I had a skim read because you sent a copy to me today, but I didn't get enough time to give it a thorough read. So I had a little skim read, and the most amount of swear words I've heard or read in a very long time. And that's, but look, like humor, and you might not have known. I don't know how much of my content you've seen, but I shared my mum had severe schizophrenia for my entire
Mhm.
life, and I was her full-time carer. And me and my brother looked after her, but it was humor that kept us going. We would make each other
Yes.
laugh. If she'd done something completely ridiculous, like you could easily just fall into a pit of pity for yourself and for her and everything. So you try and like bring each other up with laughter, with humor, mimicry, different things to actually bring yourself, it felt, into a much better state. So you could be more productive. Was that something that you naturally went to? And it sounds like your mum had humor already in her nature. Was it? Do you think it was her that brought that humor into you and enabled you to
Absolutely.
have that humor to witness it in that way?
Absolutely. In fact, it was her coping mechanism. And it was very funny because like I now do stand-up comedy as well as one of my hyphens. It's just something that brings joy to me and to many people. I love it. I love making people laugh. There's nothing more addictive. Talking about addiction, there's nothing more addictive than being in front of an audience and having them laugh at something you said or did. And I can't, with good conscience, say that that doesn't come from from my mom. It does. My mom, she had every stand-up comic album from the 60s, 70s, and 80s on vinyl and on 8-track. And she would play them on loop. And she was a whiz at electricity. So she would rig up speakers that would be in the yard, in the garden, in the chicken coop. Like there would be these speakers so she could have music. She loved country music. She loved pop music. She loved rock music. But she would play them on loop. And we had the record player that had the arm that would repeat the record. We had the 8-track that you could put on that would repeat the whatever tape was in it. So my mom had that ingrained in her, and she played them incessantly. And I didn't even pay attention, but when I, writing the book and then learning more about her through to being her caregiver, I realized that her coping mechanism is definitely my coping mechanism. And it was the way that I deal with everyday life and stress and horrible things happening. I do it through humor. And one of the things that she was a master at was deflection, and she could deflect a conversation by throwing in a joke. She could change the energy of a room by throwing in a joke, and I can do the same thing. And it's like I'm the most the person in staff meetings who says the most inappropriate things to get people to stop being on their loop that they get stuck in. And so yeah, it was definitely her influence that led me to stand up comedy, but also that it was something that I learned later in life, that it was just the way she coped, and it was the way that she raised us too. Because if we were having a bad day, or if we were sad, or if we were angry, she would do stuff to break that energy. She was a master at it. And this is a woman of simple means. She never graduated from high school. She never went to college. She worked all of her life in restaurants and factories. In fact, because our family was so poor, I would sign out of work. I signed out of school at noon every day from my sophomore year till my senior year, and I would go to work. And then in my senior year, I would go to college classes in the evening. So I was going to high school in the morning, and then I would sign out, and I would just take my basic courses. I didn't take any, and whatever was required by the state, and then the electives I didn't have to take. They allowed me work release based on
Mm,
need. So I would go work in the factory with my mom, making I think
mm,
$3 an hour, stuffing envelopes for a bulk mailer. And then on the weekends, I worked as a waiter slash bartender slash whatever they needed at the restaurant that both my mother and grandmother worked at. And so even when I was 16, I worked in a pizzeria with my grandmother. My grandmother's very, very Sicilian, very tiny, long black hair. And she was a whiz at making pizza and making any Italian food. That's how my cookbook came to be, was because in the 1970s, I lived with my grandmother. So I was flooded with those memories during the pandemic. And here we are in lockdown. What do you do in lockdown? So I navigated that path by transferring my art into writing, which I've never done. And that's one thing I do want to say is that if I can do it, anyone can do it. Writing is hard, but telling your story is easy. The rest of it is surrounding yourself with good people and positive influences and doing the research. There are a million YouTube tutorials out there for all kinds of writers. So um, I encourage people to just go for it because it is definitely rewarding.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and I was really interested, like you said in your early when you left the mountains and you went into New York and you was dancing.
Hmm.
Where did your performance sort of life come from? What drove you to be a sort of performer in that way?
Well,
And
having
also
okay.
being a male and going and dancing, was that something in your family or in anything that was frowned upon, or was it always sort of a blessing?
Well, this was here's the thing. It was not okay to be gay. It was not okay to be a dancer. It was not okay to be a male dancer anytime in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But it happened, and people accepted it. My parents were both artistic people. My mother, like I said, she loved stand-up comedy. She loved performance. She loved art. She loved music. My father was a musician. He played the most brilliant guitar. He could pick up any instrument. And so in my earlier life, that was sort of my go-to was art and music, and I was surrounded by it. But I also have to say that I was part of a Boy Scout group, and our Boy Scouts group's focus was Native American culture and dance. So we would document and recreate American Indian, Native American dances, and primarily with the Cherokee in North Carolina. We worked with the Cherokee Historical Society and the tribe to document their dances. But that's theater. That's the most primitive theater out there, is telling and teaching the children how not to act or how to act, telling them about the harvest, telling them about the quail, telling them about, how the deer is part of the land, how the bear is part of the land. And all of these, and there was a beautiful dance about a bald eagle that I actually got to recreate. So that was like where I cut my teeth for my love of the stage and for my love of dance. But then it wasn't until in the 80s, there was a ballet theater that gave me a full scholarship. The Stroudsburg Ballet Theater was hiring male dancers for a ballroom show. And I thought, well, it was frowned upon for sure. It was not, like I said, it was not okay to be gay. It was not okay to be a dancer on top of all that. But a ballroom dancer, that was the most masculine way to approach the art that I thought. And at that time, that was the safest way for me to, be who I was and yet still appease the people around me. But I absolutely fell in love with it. It was this beautiful art form. And nowadays it's things are so different and people are accepted. I've come out so many times. I don't feel like that's even a question. And my extended family, they have their opinions. So there are extended family that I do not associate with because of that very strong anti feelings that they have about my people. You know what I mean. So it wasn't something that was actually glorified or frowned upon. I kind of found the safest route at that time. But then once I moved to New York, all bets were off. I was tap dancing. I was doing jazz. I was in a ballet corps. So I really went balls to the wall dance. Dance was my core. That was how I started my life. My body was my instrument. I wasn't, and this was another thing that why I gravitated towards dance. One of the stories that's in my cookbook is the story of my first words. And I was incredibly shy when I was a baby. It took me so long to speak. They thought I had a speech impediment. They thought that that I was deaf, but I was just painfully shy. And I was also in this very bombastic, dysfunctional family. So as a young person, I was just very quiet. But and I don't know about language on your podcast, but my first words were fucking reindeer. So so I mean, you can bleep it out if you need to. But that is the God's honest truth. My first words were fucking reindeer, and it all stems from being so painfully shy, and yet the way the story rounds out, I can tell you the story too. But my grandmother was coming over for dinner. My mother was making dinner. It was around Christmas time, and I have an older brother, and we get two of everything every Christmas. My mother bought two of everything, and she even dressed us alike for the first 16 years of our life. Um, but we were toddlers, and we were fighting over these two inflatable reindeer that my mother bought. They were side by side on the by the Christmas tree. So one pops, and we start fighting over the other one. Mom hears a struggle in the living room, comes in with a wooden spoon, of course, separates us into our thinking chairs because we didn't have timeouts back then. We had thinking chairs, and then we were separated because we were fighting. So then my grandmother's car pulls up, and we both run to the door to meet her, and I grab her skirt and in full voice point to the closet where my mother threw the reindeer in. I said, Nana, Nana, fucking reindeer, fucking reindeer. Because my mother grabbed the reindeer from us and said, give me that fucking reindeer. And she threw it in the closet, and we ran to the door. And that's how my first words were born.
Nice.
So,
And do you think that language was influenced from your mother?
oh my
She's
God, are you kidding?
yeah,
Yes, they both had mouth like truck drivers.
yeah, and that's always been that way.
This is the thing. I also feel like there's a difference in the way that people and the manner of speech is always regional, but also manner of speech and also what is allowed. And during that time period, remember, stand-up comedy was still bubbling up, so it was becoming more mainstream. You could see stand-up on TV, you could see it on the Jack Parr show, you could see it on Johnny Carson. So my mother had all of those albums that had all of the foul language on it, so that influenced us for sure as far as what we could and couldn't say. But my mother and grandmother both had mouths like a truck driver, as we say here in the States. It's very much a regional thing. And, my grandmother was incredibly religious. And it's funny that she was, she would have this mouth like a truck driver one day and then go to church on Sunday the next day, so, um, and that's just the nature of the beast, I think.
Yeah, nice. No, it sounds like it's, like you said, such an interesting sort of upbringing and lifestyle, and you've been so many different, multi-talented in so many ways. And I want to know, like, what was your first, like, what comes to mind? What was your first struggle in life that you remember?
Um,
What comes to mind as the first
first
struggle?
struggle, definitely. I mean, struggle that I absolutely fought with was definitely being gay. When I realized, I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. Um, I realized that I definitely knew that I was different, and I did not want to be gay. I definitely didn't want to. I wanted what everybody else wanted, and it just was not in my chemistry. And I fought with that tooth and nail. I had many, many dark nights of the soul praying, because that's what we did back then, praying for for God to make me straight. And that would have been that, and as well as I didn't try to hide who I was. I was very flamboyant, but I didn't. I whenever anybody ever broached the subject about homosexuality, I always was like, well, I'm straight, but I just prefer, I like these colorful, I like the color pink, or I like these, these flamboyant characters. In the 80s, I was very into the British invasion, of how, David Bowie and Mick Jagger and the Thompson Twins and Boy George, Marilyn, and Dead or Alive. All those gender
Hmm.
fuck, gender bender type of performers were just. They still had an air of masculinity, which is what I stuck to because I thought that was safe. But it still was Bobby trying to be Bobby. And the biggest struggle was with myself because, you know, There's, the truth of the matter is that you're born gay like you're born with blue eyes. It's just your chemistry, it's your makeup, it's in your DNA. And
Yeah.
the more you embrace it, the better your life will be. But that was definitely it. And being in a part of the country that was very homophobic, very racist, it was really difficult because you would try to get along, you would try to belong, and it was never an easy path until I came to New York and I met all these fabulous people. They were like back home. I remember one of my uncles was like, all queers need to be on an island somewhere, and I said, yeah, Manhattan. So
Yeah.
so that's where I ended up, and that would have been probably that, and also struggling with reading because I had a reading comprehension issue, and it wasn't until later that I realized that I had a little bit of dyslexia because even though they were testing us for reading comprehension, I memorized the shape of the words so I could get through those tests, but I didn't really understand what the words meant. So there was a little bit of that in the back of my brain that I was working through as well. So, and just feeling dumb all the time. I don't like to feel stupid. I don't like to feel an unintelligent person.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's really interesting. Can I ask when you was 8 and you first sort of had a realization that you was
mhm,
different, um, like 'cause I can't remember the first time I knew I was straight sort of thing. It's not something I don't
mhm.
remember the first time I looked at a girl. It's not there as a memory. Um, like what at what point did like what I'm just trying to think. What do you remember sort
Well,
of feeling, and like was there a moment that happened, or was it
yeah,
like
I mean, it may have even been
time?
earlier than 8 years old, actually, because no, I was in fifth grade, and we had a we it was the 60s and 70s, so we had a dance at the school, and I danced with a boy, and no one said anything, but I kind of was like, well, none of the girls want to dance with me, and I asked this boy to dance, and so that was unheard of at the time, but no one questioned it. It was
Mm,
just kind of like and partially because the teacher that I remember being that gym teacher that we had, Miss Deswanick was her name. I'll never forget it. But she brought dance to the school, and for the first time, I remember being 3 years old watching the movie West Side Story. And I remember it because I was 3 years old because it was in the house. It was in our old house, the house that we that we lived in until I was 3 years old. And then we moved on to the hill when I was four. And I remember that very vividly saying, boys can dance. Boys can do that. I never saw a boy do that. I want to do that. And I remember that memory, like it stuck with me very
interesting.
vividly. And then later in life, seeing someone like John Travolta in Grease and in Staying Alive and in Saturday Night Fever, here's this macho guy dancing. And then it was sort of like, well, if he can do it, why can't I? So seeing those people in that movie, in those three movies, it was very much informative that a man was allowed to dance. And indeed, a man could dance. It just had to be done in a masculine way for society to accept it. And that was
Yeah,
where I had to navigate in a very, very specific way because there was just no way I was going to get the acceptance that my family actually were capable of. They could accept a ballroom dancer, they could accept a masculine dancer, but they would never accept. They would just never accept someone who's gay. Now that was my immediate family. You know, have since all come around because I have a cousin who's gay and I had an uncle who was gay. So, as society became more accepting, people would lighten up of their viewpoints. And but I wish they were there in that point when I was, very young because I could have used those loving arms and loving guidance because I feel like that in itself is what frames you as a person. And I could have probably reached goals a lot faster had I not been basically hiding who I was by
Yeah,
trying to be hyper masculine, or going to the stereo archetypes of hyper masculine people.
yeah. So what
Just
you
yeah, go ahead.
you mentioned with your, like, so you was dancing, and then like at what point did you say come out as a professional dancer first, or you come out as gay? And you didn't mention your
I
father much. Did you come out to your mother first? Like, how did
I
that
didn't.
process work?
It was very interesting. It was an interesting process because um, I came out to my cousin first. My cousin, who is, my closest, and I knew that she would accept me because she had gay friends that she introduced us to. So I knew that she was a safe option. My biggest fear was that if I came out to somebody, that they would tell my parents before I was ready to tell my parents.
Hmm.
My father was dying of cancer at the time that I came out. So I didn't actually tell him to his face because he was basically dying. But circumstances at the time led me to come out to my mother. But before that, I was sort of forced out of the closet by my brother and sister-in-law. My sister-in-law was at the time very supportive, loving, and she just knew before anybody else knew. And she sort of pushed me into that uh, into that part of my life. And then I told my mom, and then my father passed away, and then I didn't have any relationship with my mom for almost a year because she wasn't very accepting. She was very standoffish at that point, and we had had a falling out about all of that. And she just didn't know how to deal with it, and she didn't know how to come to terms with it. And while at the same time, she was dealing with the loss of my father. So, and my father was not exactly a talkative person. He wasn't really open, and he wasn't somebody that I felt safe with. I don't really remember him that much, which is he's been gone almost 30 years. So I don't remember him I don't remember a lot about him, but he was and still is an influence in my life because he taught me how to read music. I mean, he taught me not to read music. Sorry, he taught me how to feel music and to listen and use my ear to be able to sing and to be able to play instruments is about listening. It's not so much about reading off a page and trying to find a note. It's about listening to where the music is. Now, you need to have somebody play it for you if you've never seen it before or heard it before. So I do have a little bit of music theory in me, so I kind of have an idea. But dad was, you know, dad was a little bit uh, not not as open and as embracing as my other relatives were.
Okay, what instrument did he play?
My dad played the guitar, and he could pick up any instrument and play it. I had started with saxophone, and I hated it, and then and I tried guitar, and I hated it. But then I started singing, and I loved singing, so I stuck with the voice. But fast forward to I think it was 2000, I got a job in a musical called Barnum, and in that musical, everybody in the cast plays instruments. But I was the cover, I was the swing. I covered 17 people in the chorus. So if they played an instrument, I would learn just their parts. So I had to learn snare drum, bass drum, uh, accordion. What was the other? Glockenspiel. And I would have to learn these instruments to go on for other people. There was also a cello moment in there, but there was no way I was learning cello that quickly to be able to play it on stage. It just wasn't happening. And for the performances where where the cellist character was out, they just had a musician step in and play the part. But I learned from what my dad taught me how to deal with those things, and I practiced a lot. And I, recently started to play violin, doing online tutorials. So I have musicality in my body. It's just part of my DNA. It's just growing up with a musician as a father. So
Yeah, and it's so nice, like you say, you don't have like the strong memories because it's so long ago, but the core value that he installed in you is still something that you're constantly using. And I wonder whether, because to me, I see the body, a bit like you said earlier, the body's an instrument and life is the song we play. So when we're in tune, it's a beautiful song. When we're out of tune, no one wants to hear it or play it.
Exactly.
And I think, do you think your ability to even dance was because he taught you how to feel music?
I think so, because when you are the only way a dancer can actually convey emotion is by absorbing the intensity of uh, the music and feeling where the music is going. There are highs, there are lows. Um, Classic example is in the 80s, we had the chord progression that came through with a lot of the music that was in the 80s. There was always that, you know, in every Duran Duran song, there was the chord progression was low, but then it would jump the octave or it would jump at the end of the song so that you knew you were getting to the end of the song because the music got more intense, but then the octave changed or the pitch changed. Something changes about it. And that is usually where a choreographer would put their tricks or they would put a lift. They would do something to illustrate what was going on in the music on stage so that the body was an instrument representing the music. Now, not
Mm.
every choreographer is going to agree with that. Everybody has their opinions about music and dance. I found that to me, one of the most beautiful things is seeing a ball gown float across the dance floor during a waltz. It's just the most beautiful, like flowing, and that's a marriage of the arts. It's a marriage of dance, it's a marriage of music, it's a marriage of costume design, and it's also a marriage of culture. So those kind of artistic moments that I had when I was younger were all elevated when I became a dancer because I was like, it was an aha moment, but it was also like, this is what my dance teachers were all telling me, about ballet. Like you're counting, yes, you're counting the music, counting the music. You're entering and exiting, and you're listening for the highs and lows, the elements that create the music in the same way that your body is going across the stage. So I always had that ability to connect to music, and that's even in my later life as a circus performer. I always chose powerful songs or instrumentals to perform to because if it was a song that had a message lyrically, I didn't want to illustrate the lyrics because I felt like that was doing the music a disservice and also was doing me a disservice as an artist. I used to listen to a lot of film soundtracks and a lot of film soundtracks, like believe it or not, the Jurassic Park film soundtrack is the most beautiful, lush orchestrations that anybody could ever use. But it's so identifiable that it's almost comical to use in a piece nowadays. Um,
Mm.
but but the like when you connect to music, both on the ground and in the air, there are still ways to connect movement to the intensity of the music. And I would use that in my aerial performances as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask with the circus performance because, like I said, multi-talented and you've done a lot of different things, and I can see how they're all synchronized. They're all in the same area of, like I said, performance, dance, and movement. But how did circus life and how did that enter your life?
It's very interesting because I had only been to the circus at Madison Square Garden in the 70s. My cousin took us. And we would go every year. Every year, Ringling Brothers was in there. Or if there was another circus that was what we call a mud show down in Jersey, we would go see a show there. And I was always fascinated and enamored by the acrobats. But because acrobatic lessons were so expensive, I never got the opportunity. We didn't have a male gymnastics team at my school, so there was no opportunity for me to learn acrobatics. So when I moved to New York, I was bartending in between gigs and I was coat checking, bartending, waitering, whatever I could do to make ends meet. And one of my regular customers had heard me sing because where I worked one time was a piano bar. And he was like, I want you to be in this musical. You're perfect for it. You don't have to audition. I've heard you sing. You're charismatic and you're an actor. And it was a musical version of an old Disney film called The Circus Adventures of Toby Tyler. And Toby Tyler was the catalyst for. He was this little red-haired boy from the Midwest who ran away and joined the circus. So I didn't have any circus skills, but they found the only coach in Manhattan at the time, a Ukrainian Olympian, Irina Gold. She's still alive, but she has dementia right now and does not remember me, but I certainly remember her. And she kicked my butt. She was one of the best trainers I had, and she also introduced me to the world of circus. And I was able to then take my dance training and put it in the air. It was like this no-brainer as well because circus performers made triple what actors were making at the time. And so I started to get work as a performer in the circus world and in the nightclub world in New York, which was bubbling up in the 80s and 90s, where you could get a job at a nightclub performing over the dance floor 2-3 times over the course of an evening and make your rent in one weekend. I literally remember performing 2 nights a week. The first night paid my rent, and the rest of it I sacked away as much as I could because I knew I would need that money, and I also would put it towards lessons, towards dancing, towards acting. But I was making so much more money as an acrobat that I just sort of steered away from theater at that time and just became a full-time trapeze performer. And it was difficult in that time period to be male, again, in a different dominated career. There were 6 performers in the city at that time, me and 5 women. So the 5 women had the lion's share of the nightclubs and of the jobs that were out there because there was always this thing about seeing the pretty girl over the dance floor, and I get it. It's an aesthetic. People enjoy, it doesn't necessarily mean anything in particular. It's just people are attracted to that. So I would have to wait my turn to get into those nightclubs because those women worked every week. So when one was out and they didn't have a cover, I would go in. And so that's how I cut my teeth on multiple different apparatus as well, because if you worked at a club, if you worked every week, they didn't want to see the same act every week. They wanted something new. They wanted a different costume. They wanted a different apparatus. So I went from static trapeze to swinging trapeze to an apparatus called cloud swing to what is a steel hoop. Looks like a giant hula hoop, but it's actually steel. It's called lyra. I performed on that. I would do, there was a rope that spun called Spanish web. So you would lock your hand into a loop and then you'd spin 60 miles an hour over the dance floor. And that was what the impresarios of the nightclub world were looking for, the excitement, the way to elevate the crowd so that they would actually stop for a moment and then drink more. Because the action, what happens is the action of you up there for 5 minutes stops their conversation, and it stops them from either, stops them from dancing as well. And then they end up finishing their cocktails and going to the bar. So the register would ring after every performance that you would go up. So that was what the impresarios were, and the nightclub owners would do to plug you in. And so then, all through the 90s, I was training. I went to school in San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco to train at the circus school out there because there was only one circus school in the United States at that time. Now there's like 6,000. But I then moved back to New York when my grandmother was ill. And after my grandmother died, I took a break from trapeze and circus, and I got a job as a gymnastics coach. And I was not trained in gymnastics. I learned gymnastics backstage doing circus. I worked with a troupe of Mongolian horse riders, and the women taught me how to tumble. They taught me how to tumble into bales of hay so that I wouldn't get hurt because we didn't have too many mats backstage. But the bales of hay were how I learned. And it wasn't like I was an Olympian, but I could figure out how to do a round off back handspring back tuck. And I could put that into my repertoire. But then I started teaching children's gymnastics, coaching gymnastics, and it was a needed break. And it wasn't until a few years after that I was called back to the theater with the musical Barnum, which is a story of P.T. Barnum's life as told through a series of circus acts. And I became a circus trainer, and I became a aerial sequence designer by combining my two worlds of circus and theater. And that led to the 3 shows that I worked on Broadway, multiple off-Broadway shows, national tours. I even worked with the rock band Fish at Madison Square Garden, doing aerial in Madison Square Garden two times. And so I had the opportunity to have my aerial wings put into different industries. And that
Nice.
led to where I am now.
Oh, nice. And yeah, there's such an interesting life, and like you said, a very active one. Um, so I want to get back to you got the book with your mum, and you've got all these things going off. And I think from what you said earlier, your mum was suffering for dementia until she passed for about 6 years. Is
Yeah,
that right? And
it was a little more
so,
than that. We noticed it around 2009, but it didn't get really bad until around 2015.
how did that intertwine when that first started happening? And you've got all this going on, and you're achieving so much. You're incredibly physically active at this time, and I imagine even socially, because of the scenario you're in, very socially active. How did that transform? Because you said you became her main caregiver. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, yeah. She moved up here with me in 2015. She was passed around from relative to relative. She was living with my brother in Florida and moved back up here. And then we were trying to find a place for her, like an assisted living kind of a situation. Um, and just couldn't find the right fit. So she was passed around relative to relative. Cousin Lynn, cousin Carol, cousin Deb. My nieces down in Florida took her in for a while. And then she finally moved in with me. And it was incredibly difficult because she was going downhill. But the thing is, familiarity breeds contempt is the phrase I can use, is that you can walk down the street in New York City and hear crazy people talk and hear them just rambling on about anything. When you hear those crazy things come out of the body that gave you life and the person that is your mother, it hits you in a different way. And there were many times that she would repeat herself. She would forget certain things. She would forget immediately, like that I made breakfast for her, or I would leave breakfast for her in the fridge, and I would just say, okay, 20 seconds in the microwave, and then you have a hot breakfast. And so there were. I noticed when she stopped making her own breakfast, when she's, I'd have to put the food in front of her to get her to eat. And I was also not taking care of myself. I was sleeping on a chair next to her in the living room so that when she got up to go to the restroom, I would have to help her. I helped her. I bathed her. I changed her. I would, I don't want to, caregiving, you become selfless when it comes to caregiving. You take your needs and put them on the shelf. You compartmentalize your grief. You don't show grief in front of them, but gradually you're losing this person every day. So I was with her through all of her dementia, and then finally she had 2 trips to the ER. One was a pancreatitis. She ended up in a rehab center. Then they released her too soon. And then she had a pulmonary embolism and went back to the hospital, back to the rehab center. And that's when I arranged for her to be a full-time resident. And she was not happy about it. She probably hated that facility. But I knew she was safe. I knew she was going to be taken care of. And I knew that I could visit her whenever I wanted. And they were lovely. They really treated her well. It was tough for me because my mother was fiercely independent. So to watch her independence slip away and watch the person that I knew as my mother slip away. Like when I look at videos and photos and things like that of her in the nursing home, because I visited her literally every day till they shut down the visitations to nursing homes. Um, I I look at those and I'm like, why didn't I see this sooner? I was blind to the fact that she was indeed going through dementia and severe dementia. She knew who I was. She knew my brother. She knew my cousins. She didn't know what year it was. She always thought that she had a green DeSoto car parked in the garage. Um, she would have memories of my father and say, "When is your father going to come visit me?" And then my grandmother as well, both who have passed for almost 30 years. So looking back on it, that's why I was writing the book, was I was really using her humor to cope. And mom died at the beginning of the pandemic. I didn't know how to express myself artistically as a as a trainer, as an acrobatic trainer, an aerialist. Like, I spent my entire life dancing and in the air, and then all of a sudden there's no theater, there's no circus, there's no dance, there's no work. So I had to pivot again and do things online. I did voiceovers online. I did stand up online, believe it or not.
Hmm.
There was a benefit that didn't happen because of the pandemic. It was shut down, but they were still having the benefit online. So they hired me to be like the red carpet. So as people would dress up in their houses, they would show off what they were going to wear to the benefit. And I would be like the Joan Rivers character. What are you wearing? Who's this? What's that? Oh my God, that looks horrible. Where did you buy that? You should take the person who made that. And I would go through all these, quips, and they loved it. And it was a way for people to connect. I
Oh,
I
nice.
voiced a puppet over the course of the pandemic. I also am a licensed officiant. I officiated 6 weddings, both
Hmm.
in person and on Zoom. So I pivoted pretty quickly to online life, but also because I didn't have access to art, I I did, a friend sent me a paint by numbers, and I thought, oh, okay, that's fun. Then they did the jewel by numbers. I don't know if you've seen those little plastic beads that shine. You can make the paintings. And then
Oh,
but then it was like the day after mom died, and after I made her funeral arrangements, um, I caught COVID as well. So not only was she sick, but or not only she was dead, but I was sick, and I had all this grief that I had no place to go. So I started writing. I started writing the cookbook first, and then I started compiling mom's quotes through my grief process. And I realized this needs to be a book. This needs to be for everybody who's out there who has dealt with, being a caregiver, being someone who is responsible for, you know, basically, preparing someone for the end of their life. And as sad as that is, it can be a very beautiful thing. But it wasn't until a year after mom passed that I really decided that it needed to be a book. And 1 year to the date, March 21st, coming up a week from today, will be the second anniversary of mom's passing. But a year ago, March 21st, is when I put that book together and actually really honed it down and had and really got it on paper. And I've been
oh,
surrounded by
nice.
beautiful people and wonderful people who helped me with that book. We have so many people to thank for the art that's in our life, but that in particular, I had so many people that were willing to just gift me their knowledge, and authors, giving advice and things like that. And, someone and helping me edit, because I'm not an editor. I'm not a writer. I'm not an editor. I'm not a chef, but I wrote a cookbook and I wrote my mother's quotes. I really feel like there's a lesson to be learned from the pandemic, is that if life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make my grandmother's limoncello tiramisu. It's in the book.
Hmm.
Turn those lemons into something even more beautiful than lemonade.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I have two things I wanted to get from that. One is, when is the book out, and where do people find it? So,
Well, the Shit My Mama Says is on Amazon right now. You can go to amazon.com, hashtag Shit My Mama Says. And that's how the title came about, was I was sharing those quotes on social media with the hashtag shit my mama says. And I'm kind of giving it away. You can search for them and find them. But in the book, the first book was published in July of last year, and it was published in July of 2021 because the memorial service for my mother and the 6 people we lost during the pandemic was all one group, but my mother was the only one being interred. Everybody else had their ashes scattered. It was my mother's dream and wish to be buried next to my father, and because of the pandemic, we weren't able to have a burial, so she was cremated. And then a year and a half later, we put her ashes next to my dad. But I wanted that book to go into her ash vault. When you go to a
Mm.
cemetery, what do you see on the gravestone? You see a name, the day they died, the day they were born, and maybe one statement if they were in the army, beloved wife and mother. I told you I was sick. Whatever. There's something on
Yeah.
there, and so I wanted that if in 100 years somebody breaks open this vault and this book survives, they'll know a little bit more about the person whose ashes are in this
No.
vault. And so I pushed really hard to get the book published in July of 2021. And then the cookbook, I'm on my 7th draft right now. I actually edited it yesterday and put in all the photos yesterday. The cookbook is done. It's just trying to get it all edited down for content and for publishing. I'm hoping to do it soon. I had set a goal of Thanksgiving 2021, but that goal date came and went. But we'll see. I don't want to put a date on it right now, but I know that it's close. It's very, very close. So, but you shit my mama says you can buy on Amazon right now.
Nice. And do you have social profiles online where people can follow you for updates on when the next
Absolutely.
one's releasing?
Sure. At Bobby Hedglin-Taylor on Instagram and TikTok, at Escape to Ravioli Mountain on Instagram and TikTok, and then Escape to Ravioli Mountain, a memoir and food on Facebook. Yeah, find me on all socials and share your stories and share. And I encourage everybody out there to write and don't care what anybody else says, write because it will change your life.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll be sure to put all them links in the description. I
Oh,
wanted to
thank
ask one more personal
you.
question as well to do with the caretaking. I
Hmm.
cared for my mum for 3 decades, and ended up becoming a carer for my loved Danya as well for the last 6 years.
Hmm.
And a process that happened for me is I had to, it's a bit like you said earlier, you don't want to show the person you're caring for the pain that you're suffering through the
Right.
acts that you're having to do. And it's like witnessing them suffering, and then you're suffering internally your own sufferings, and all sorts of things are going on that are so emotional. And for me, I taught myself a process of just numbing myself and blunting in myself to feeling that pain. And then it took time for me to realize that by numbing the painful pain, I'd also numbed myself from joy, from love, from excitement, and I had to rewrite and rewire all that process. Did you notice after caring for your mum that your sensitivity levels to actually good feelings had changed? And did you put anything in place to sort of bring yourself back to life, if that happened?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's another pivot that happened as well. In April of 2020 or April of 2021, I had hip replacement. So, a dancer, acrobat, physical performer my entire life, had the largest bone in my body replaced by titanium. Um, so that changed me completely because now I'm still trying to find out who I am in that light. But caregiving is a selfless act. You you hide yourself, and then the way that I dealt with the pain was through humor, and it was through not only the humor of my mom's book, but and her quotes, but there is nothing more addictive to me than making an audience laugh. Hearing an audience laugh by something I said or did is the most addictive sound in the world to me. And it's something that I treasure, that I have that ability, because I know that if I didn't have that ability, I would go mad. I would be a basket case. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have in your repertoire the ability to spread humor and spread joy. And I will always look for the humor in any situation. I don't think that there's an easy way out of caregiving. Obviously, when the person passes, that's, it seems like that's the end, but it's actually not. It's actually the beginning. It's the beginning of your grief. It's the beginning of you processing that loss and navigating the world without that person. And, to this day, I still get flooded with different types of emotion. Sometimes there's anger, sometimes there's fear, sometimes there's worry, sometimes there's absolute love, and sometimes there's humor. But you're still processing that loss. It's been 2 years since that fateful phone call from the nursing home saying that mom had passed. But I literally come to it with the utmost respect for my mother. She set out to be a mother. She didn't set out to be anything in life but a mom, and she achieved that goal. And she wasn't perfect. Nobody's perfect when it comes to parenting, because no parent comes with no parent or child comes with a useful a manual that says this is how to parent, this is how to be a child. We kind of go with our instincts and what our parents did, and that is where you figure out and how to navigate your way back to loving the person that may have hurt you and giving them a new place in your heart. And I feel like that's where the process happens after they're gone. And that is what I'm still in that process. It doesn't go away after a year or 2 years. I'm still, I still have thoughts of my father that because I don't remember a lot about him, I want to try to dig and find those memories that are still there so that I can memorialize him as well. And even though I spent extra 30 plus years with my mom without my dad, I still have this love and admiration for both of them for what they gave me. And now that I'm pivoting my world, who knows what the next steps are? I'm enjoying writing, but is that where I'm supposed to be? I don't know. And I think that is the lesson: is that don't fear the unknown. Just listen to the universe and see what happens, and step out, and the street will come to meet you. Or, as we say in the circus, step off the platform, the net will appear. So.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And no, and I can, from everything you said and what you shared, I can really see how, like I said, even not knowing your father, that every time you've danced and you've performed and you've felt, it seems to be that's like your gift and your sort of connection with him. And every time you make someone smile or laugh or entertain them, that's like your gift from your mother. And when you're intertwining them with a book and writing and graceful sort of production of your words and humor, like it's a marriage of their relationship in your being. So it's really nice to hear all that coming together and where you are now. We're getting to the end of the show, I'm afraid. I could keep talking to you. My problem is I love to connect and talk to people. I could go for longer, but
Absolutely.
I have to try and keep these to about an hour. When
Sure,
I first
understood.
started podcasts, I didn't realize. I thought I'll just go with the flow and see where it goes. And then after doing that podcast, it ended up like 2.5 hours long.
Mm-mm.
Then I've got to edit that, and then yeah, it's like all right. I think an hour is good.
Yeah,
um,
it's all good.
but no, it's been really nice. I have a few just short, fun questions I ask
Sure.
every guest at the end. Have you got a moment for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you could choose one, cats or dogs?
Oh, definitely dogs.
What's your favorite color?
Red.
What gets you excited? What excites and motivates you?
Um, Definitely definitely creating humor. Definitely creating stand up. Creating those moments to make people laugh.
And what does the opposite? What turns you off and just drives your energy to the ground?
Um, Entitled people. People who feel like they're better than everybody else, or have to put people down to make themselves feel better. I don't have time for that. I don't have patience for that.
Yeah.
And there's no room
What?
for it in my life.
No, I don't think there's no room for it in anyone's life.
No,
Like you said, it's just not a productive way of being.
no, not at all.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, I guess would be birds. I'm a bird lover, so hearing birds first thing in the morning. I feed birds on my windowsill. It's not really easy to do in New York, but I make bird feeders all through the winter so that I have birds by my window every year, all through the winter.
Oh, nice. What sound or noise do you not like so much?
uh, Motorcycles. Oh, it's funny. I made people laugh. There was a group of motorcyclists really, making revving their engines and driving past us. And it was, these macho guys in leather jackets. And there was a bunch of people sitting out on their deck as these are passing by. And I said, sorry about your penis. And they lost it. They laughed hysterically. They totally got it because that motorcycle, we call it little dick energy.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you have to bleep that out, but either way, I just hate that toxic masculinity as told through a loud car, a big truck, or a motorcycle.
Yeah, it's almost ironic with the motorbikes and the look because it's all the leather,
Yeah,
sleeveless vests, and like in some ways it could associate being very camp. All greasy,
exactly,
all men
exactly,
together in a group, and it's like which yet it could be at the same time the most homophobic group at the same time.
exactly,
But
exactly.
yeah, no
And
motorbikes because I spend a lot of time in nature, and there's nothing worse than a loud motorbike flying through nature.
exactly.
It's so unharmonic, and it just destroys the atmosphere so quick.
Yeah, another thing I like is in the fall, I used to love to hear the leaves rustle as the wind passed through the leaves.
Oh,
It was the
nice.
most meditative, most beautiful sound. And I miss the country. I miss, li- I miss living in Pennsylvania. I miss being
Hmm.
able to go up there and just turn off the city for a couple of days. I just miss that part of it. And of course, my family's connection is there. But I just miss that part of it. I miss that. I miss nature a lot.
Yeah. Maybe when you get the cookbook done, you can go get some publicity shots up there with the book and show the home grounds of where it all rooted from.
We shall see. The house was foreclosed in 2009, so it's basically a shambles now. So it's not really. It would be lovely if I could do that, but I think Ravioli Mountain is now part of my mind and not necessarily a concrete place anymore.
Yeah. Okay. What
So
do you love about yourself?
that I'm funny, that I can make people laugh and make people smile. I that is my best trait is the one gift that I have that am am fiercely loyal to.
Oh, nice. What do you love in others?
Openness, willingness to accept people and chat with people who maybe have different opinions, but are willing to listen, to learn about other people. I also love that um, smiles. I miss smiles because of all the mask wearing. I miss
Yeah.
seeing people's faces. I miss smiling. And, there's an old Dolly Parton saying, if you see someone without a smile, give them yours.
Oh,
And
nice.
I'm one of those people that if I see you frowning, I will smile at you to make you smile.
Yeah, I was actually sharing with my love Danielle something similar, like at the beginning of the pandemic with a mask. Because I always, if I'm in a shop, and especially if you're in a queue and there's a little child like in front of you, is to catch their eye and
Hmm.
smile at them, and you see them instantly, just like you said, take it on themselves. They suddenly have this giant smile, and it's contagious.
Yep.
And then everyone's in the shop, and then we've all got these masks on, but the kids don't have a mask, so I can still see their face. They're not smiling, and then I try to smile for a mask, and it doesn't work.
No,
And you don't get any.
it's
And I was like, they're growing up without smiles.
yeah, it's gonna be interesting how this current generation that will remember the pandemic in their youth. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond to it and how
Yeah,
they
how
grow
their
from it.
teenage
Because
years go and
yeah, I
furthermore.
mean there were kids that in 2020 didn't get their high school graduation. They didn't get their college uh, orientation the way the rest of us did. Some of them had to hold off for a year or a semester. So
Mm,
they missed all that. Their friends, they missed their prom, they missed all those things that you do in high school. Although I hated high school, but for kids that are out there, like a lot of people, they missed so much from those 2 years. And I missed so much from those 2 years. When I think about it, when I think this was 2 years ago, it doesn't seem that long ago. It seems like it was yesterday, but it literally has been two.
Yeah, I think it's one of them things like everyone remembers, like if they were around at that time, the moment where they were when JFK was shot. I forgot there's a saying for what
Right.
these events are, where they were when 9/11 happened and the exact
Yeah.
moment that they was in. And I think when we first heard that first 2 weeks,
Yeah.
I think we will remember where we was and what was happening. And like you said, that was 2 weeks and it's now 2 years. And at the
Yeah.
time, everyone's going, oh, it's just a little thing, 2 weeks, two
Yeah.
months,
I
little
mean,
thing, six
I
months, little
remember
thing.
I posted about this on Sunday because 2 years ago I had to make those phone calls and emails and tell people that we were shutting
I
down
saw
for
that post, yeah.
and it's like that was literally like what we had to do to just maintain. We were like, okay, 2 weeks, we'll be back, we'll be okay. But then, you know, months went by before I even thought about going on the train to go to work, and just to see people. Like, I have pictures where uh, I have a whole file of photos from the pandemic of how you would have to go to the supermarket and the line around the block for 2 hours just to get into the supermarket because they were only letting 10 people at a time in for 30 minutes. And then the line at the pharmacy with the plexiglass wall between you and the cashier, everybody in masks, everybody social distance, only 10 people allowed in the pharmacy as well. So it was like all those things, going back and looking at those photos of what New York City was decimated like a bomb hit it. We lost thousands, 20, 30,000 people in a 6 month period. It was awful. And
Mm.
walking past the funeral home where my mother was, and there was a refrigerator truck in the parking lot. All the hospitals had refrigerator trucks. All of the hospitals had makeshift morgues built on the sidewalk. They were these large wooden buildings covered with white tarps, where they would keep their dead until they could be processed and buried or cremated or give back to loved ones. It was like no other time period in my life. And I wanted to remember it very specifically with those photos, no matter how gruesome they were. My city was changed. It was like after 9/11. I was here for 9/11 as well.
Yeah.
And, the city has been changed again. The landscape of the city has been changed again. But it's very telling, as to how people get through all of that. It's going to be interesting to see this generation, the new generation that lived through this, how they grow up and how they
Yeah,
go into their life.
yep, definitely. And maybe with all them photos, you might have your third book once Ravioli Mountain's done coming along.
There
Yeah.
are. I do have plans to write another one, and I have plans to write actually the book of a musical. I'm talking to a friend who's a music writer, and we're actually writing a book, writing a story that takes place at Burning Man, which is this big event in the middle of the desert every summer in the Reno, Nevada area or outside of Reno, Nevada. And so it's a love story. So I'm not done.
Yeah, just getting
I am not,
started.
when it comes to writing though, I wrote my book on my phone. I wrote both of my books on my phone. I auto dictated it and then emailed it to myself. And then I would edit it down into what ended up being the book, so that I had the chance to, whatever stream of consciousness was coming, I would get it on paper somehow. And that's what I did. That's how I managed. Every phone has a notes section, and you can auto dictate on all the new smartphones. So I encourage people, do that first, and then the rest will come. Surround yourself
Yeah,
with good people.
did you go publishing route or self-publishing?
I did self-publishing for Shit My Mama Says. I'm still marketing Escape to Ravioli Mountain as the possibility of having it published through a publishing house, because it is getting some notice from the people that I'm sending it to. getting good critique about it. But I don't know for sure. I don't have a deal on the table. But if
Yeah.
not, it's going to be the self-publishing route, because that's what I did for Shit My Mama Says. And self-publishing is not a bad thing. It's actually great. You get 60% of the royalties, and you also have the opportunity to market your book on different platforms. So you have the full, even though you have full control over it, you also are your own agent. You are your own publicist. You have to do your own publicity. You have to do your own marketing, and that has a reach, but it also, it has its challenges as well. When you're doing something through a publishing house, they're connected to all of those things, and they will sell your book no matter where. And that's just the nature of being, self-publishing and or doing having an agent and a manager and a publishing house take your work and
Yeah.
put it out there.
Oh, nice. Well, Bobby, it has been beautiful to hear your story and to get to know you in much more depth. And yeah, I wish you all the success with the future. And yeah, keep going, man. It sounds great.
Thank
And I look
you.
forward to following you online and just seeing
Oh,
what you're up
thank you.
to and what you're doing.
Thank you. And I'll do the same.
All right, man. Have a beautiful day. And
You too. Thank you so much. Thank you. Anytime.
Hey, thank you, man. Have a great day.
You too.
All right, bye. Thank you so much for being here and listening to the Selfish Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Greenheart, and I appreciate you being here. Don't forget to check out my YouTube channel. Just search Luke Greenheart on YouTube. You'll find me. Check out my website, lukegreenheart.com. Have an amazing day, and stay tuned for more episodes. I'll be interviewing guests on their path of self-development, their paths to self, getting to know them in much more intimacy, much more depth, sharing and connecting with all, so we can have a much more blissful, joyful, and productive life together. All right, much love. Have a great day.